seats and get comfortable. Not too comfortable, but a little bit. Then we'll continue with our exciting morning plans. Welcome to day 2 of our conference. I want, first of all, to take just a moment. I want to take a moment, just first of all, would you join me in thanking R&H Theatricals for last night's reception? We had a wonderful time, didn't we? And the Hall of Fame was wonderful. And so now, would you also join me? Let's take just a moment to thank all of our vendors who came, all the wonderful products and services we've learned about. Great, that gets us going this morning. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Jim Palmerini, who is the Education Policy Director at Educational Theater Association. Jim.
So good morning to all of you who slept well and those of you who danced through the night, and I heard there were many of you who did that. So we are here to continue our discussion with leaders regarding the intersection of arts and the sciences, theater in particular. So I'm really thrilled to introduce our next speaker. We don't often get the opportunity to actually have a scientist at our podium. So we are breaking out of the choir with Robert Root-Bernstein. But before I introduce Bob, I want to just take a moment to thank our theater microphone and audio specialist, Body Mics, for their sponsorship of our keynote today. So thank you so much. And I'd also like to welcome our virtual attendees who are joining us via YouTube. If you are one of those individuals, please consider putting forth a question for our keynote during the Q&A portion of the presentation. So, again, it isn't often that we get to describe one of our keynotes as a scientist, a humanist, and artist. But that's who Robert Root-Bernstein is. Bob is currently a professor of physiology at Michigan State University, where he studies the evolution of metabolic control systems, autoimmune diseases, drug development, and the creative processes in the sciences and the arts. He exhibits his artwork both in group and solo shows and collaborates with the transmedia artist Adam Brown. Bob earned his A.B. and Ph.D. from Princeton University and did his post-doctoral work research with Jonas Salk at the Salk Institute of Biological Studies. He was awarded a prestigious 5-year MacArthur Fellowship in 1981, which allowed him to pursue his multiple interests in the sciences and the arts. He serves on the editorial board of several scientific journals and is the editor for Leonardo, the Journal of the International Society for Sciences, Technology, and the Arts, which includes also a regular column entitled Art Science that explores the intersections of the artistic and scientific practices from personal, methodological, and historical and cultural perspectives. He also writes a blog on creativity in arts and science with his wife, Michelle Root-Bernstein, called Imagine That, on the Psychology Today website. Bob has written 4 books, including Discovering, and with his wife, Michelle, Sparks of Genius. He is at work on 2 more, one on artists and musicians as scientists and inventors, and the second on modern scientists as visual artists. Of Sparks of Genius, the Kirkus Review commented, "All the imaginative needs to be fruitful is exercise. All one needs to be fruitful is exercise." Robert and Michelle Bernstein identified the thinking tools employed by history's greatest creative minds, from Albert Einstein and Jane Goodall to Amadeus Mozart and Virginia Woolf, so that anyone with the right mix of inspiration and drive can set their own genius in motion. And with that, please welcome to the podium Bob Root-Bernstein.
Thank you, Jim. So, why me? Well, you heard part why I'm here. I've always done art. The little drawing up there is of my father when I was 6 years old. You can see some of my more recent stuff. There are other things that weren't in my CV. So I actually wrote my first play when I was 11, acted and produced it twice. It was really bad. I then decided I would prefer the musical route, so I played cello. I was the lead cellist in the pit for all of the musicals at my high school. Jim didn't know anything about this when he invited me. I took 4 semesters of playwriting in college, which Jim didn't know about either. And discovering my first book was actually written as a play, although it's published as a nonfiction work. He didn't know that either. So why me? Why me? We all ask that, right? Existential angst, we've got that out of the way. But isn't that what all theater is about? Why me? Why am I here? What am I doing? All right, so here's sort of my brief answer, which is I'm really interested about creative process. I think if we don't have creativity, we can't address the major problems of the world. And the one thing that the CEOs in the world can't find enough of are creative people. They know this is what they're looking for. So what is the creative process? How can we stimulate creativity? How can we harness it in our education? What can we do when we bring arts and STEM together that we can't do otherwise? Those are the kinds of questions that drive me. That's why I feel I'm here, not only here today, but just here in general. I want to put all this stuff back together. All right, to get your brains going. Creativity riddle. What do you get when you cross an abbey with a perfume factory? There is a theater answer to this.
Nonsense.
You are the first group ever to get the answer. And that's not surprising. Believe it or not, there's a perfume, right? Okay. So, nonsense, or nonsense, or whatever. Why am I asking this silly question? All right. There actually is a very serious reason here. And that is, if you go back through the literature on creativity, almost everybody says the same thing. So Arthur Kessler was a if you can see a wiggly thing and a straight line thing, and they're in different planes, but somewhere they intersect. And if they intersect and they come together, you get this surprise. Like a joke, like a riddle, in that you have to rethink what you thought you knew when you started the riddle. It gives you a surprise. You know something that you didn't know in a new way. Interestingly, here's mathematician Jacob Bernowski. He was also a poet as well as a playwright, and he says virtually the identical thing. The scientist and the artist takes 2 facts or experiences which are separate. He finds in them a likeness which has not been seen before and creates a unity. Okay, so the scientists, the novelists, all these people are saying the same thing. We need to look at how things go together. And if you actually think about what you do in theater, you're doing this all the time. The basis of every play, if you get to the real nugget of it, is taking 2 things that don't get together, the Capulets and the Montagues, and you bring them together, and what do you get? Something really fun. Marion the librarian, who's as straight-laced as you can possibly be, and you get her together with this flim-flam man, all right? And you get all sorts of fun, interesting stuff. You're taking people who wouldn't normally associate with each other. You're taking different cultural perspectives. You're taking different values. You're mixing them and finding unity, which gives you the drama. All right, so what we're going to address today is another riddle, which is what do you get when you cross theater arts with the sciences? And there's no fun pun answer here. We've got a gap, and the gap starts in literally kindergarten when we start talking about having English and science and all these different separate subjects. Why do they have to be separate? That's one of the questions. So some of the answers people are giving are STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, math. Hopefully this is not hot air, but I have to tell you, as someone who's worked in this field for 40 years now, there is a lot of hot air. We need to make sure that whatever we're doing when we make this steam actually drives something energetic and makes things happen. I love Patty Ron's revisioning of all this as technology, engineering, arts, math, and science teams. Wow, that's a lot better because we have to collaborate across disciplines. We have to get groups of people. We have to communicate in new ways and so forth. Another acronym that's out there is SEED, Sciences, Engineering, Arts, and Design. Plant those seeds and see what kinds of, the acorn's going to grow into what kind of beautiful tree. So lots of different ways of thinking about these things. I bring up SEED simply because there is a National Science Foundation project which was funded for a SEED project. The idea of this was to create a national network for people who are trying to integrate teaching across all these different areas. This is the website. If you are interested in STEM, SEED, teams, however you want to think about it, this is currently the place to go to because there are about 150 people who have posted why they do this, how they do this, their best curricula, and all those kinds of things. So if you want to get involved with STEAM, SEED teams, then join this group, share your ideas, find out what other people are doing. One of the things that I've been doing with my wife is looking at how all of these things do integrate, what's the evidence that it is useful or can be useful. And I just want to, I'm not going to go through all the data, but I just want to give you a sense of what's out there. There are many different lines of argument and lots of different kinds of data which suggest that STEM to STEAM or teams or whatever is a very valuable thing when it's done right. We've done large-scale statistical studies of scientists to see what they do in terms of arts. It has huge impact on their professional lives, as I'll show you in a moment. We've looked at case studies. I will show you a few of these case studies very quickly to give you an idea how these scientists and engineers and so forth actually use the arts. We have derived various cognitive connections, and that's going to be the basic focus of what I'm going to talk about today. There are cognitive identities in the way scientists and people in theater and the arts and so forth think. Lots of people working on those. We've tried to identify specific bridges, and that's another one of the themes I'll talk about. What are the bridges that you can build that actually work, that we know make something connect in ways that are useful? And I've been looking at the obverse, which is if arts are so valuable to science, then shouldn't artists actually be making useful scientific discoveries and inventions, which surprisingly they do, and I wish I had time to talk to you about this today. I don't. Artists, actors, playwrights, if you want to go Google something fun, actors as inventors, you will find hundreds and hundreds of inventions by actors, many of them having to do with theater, but often outside as well. And finally, arts and crafts and design and so forth offer new approaches to thinking about and understanding STEM subjects. So the kinds of data, and again, I'm not going to bore you with all this stuff, but I just want to show you the kinds of things that are out there. We looked at all of the Nobel Prize winners, everybody in the National Academy, the Royal Society, and so forth, compared them to average scientists, and anywhere between 15 to 25 times more likely for one of these high-ranking scientists to be engaged in an art or theater or something like that as an adult, even while they're doing their profession. And remember, this is 25 times, not 25%, 25 times more likely that they are engaged as a performer or a writer or a craftsman or an artist or something than the average person. STEM professionals recognize the value of the arts, at least the really good ones do. Here's the summary of all the studies. We've done dozens of studies at this point. And the summary is, as you see, musical scientists do it better. That should be fairly memorable. I mean, and this is literally true. Artistic scientists have more image in their imagination. This is literally true too, and I'm going to show you a slide later. There are studies of this. Crafty scientists are more handy. Literary scientists have the making of pundits. And again, this is the people who write novels and plays and things like that as scientists are also the ones who tend to put together whole fields. They're looking at the whole thing. And performing scientists literally perform better. All right, so if anybody asks you what the data is, these are the outcomes. How to do it. So my wife and I and a student spend the last couple of years looking at every publication we could find of anybody doing STEM to STEAM that had published. Looking for those gold standard studies that are properly controlled, where anybody who's just a total skeptic about this would still be convinced. There are only about 75 really gold standard studies where we know absolutely without a doubt that you put arts into the curriculum and you're going to improve STEM outcomes. Here's where to go. That website I told you about earlier with the seed has a draft of it. Leonardo will be publishing a 3-part survey of all of the results that we've got. These are the studies that you want to go to if you want a model for how to do this right, and know that it's going to work. If you need to convince skeptics, these are the studies you pull out to do it. Way too much information for me to go through and talk about it in any detail, so what I'm going to do again is give you the highlights. The key finding is that you have to have a bridge. What you are doing here is transfer. You are transferring ways of thinking, materials, cognitive skills, and so forth from one field to another. Many of you are all educators. You probably have heard about the transfer problem. What we found is if you have a good bridge, the transfer problem disappears. So what are bridges? Bridges are literally bridges. Okay, so here's an example of art affecting engineering. A guy named Ken Snelson literally invents a totally new way of making sculptures. Nobody's ever done it this way before. He gets patents for it and everything else. The engineers look at it and go, wow, how the heck did he do that? What's the principle? Well, there's a principle called tensegrity. I'm not going to try and explain it to you. It's not important here. This is a metaphor. The tensegrity is a principle that can be explained, it can be taught, artists can learn it, engineers can learn it. Engineers started learning it, using it to build bridges, literally, and lots of other structures, because you can make a more sturdy bridge with less material, transport it more easily, collapse it, rebuild it, all these kinds of things that nobody else can do with any other building approach. The bridge is the principle. In this particular case, we need bridges. You all know about bridges. You may not have thought about it, but in every play there's a bridge. Remember, you've got bisociation, you've got these things that don't mix, you've got two families that shouldn't be coming together. You need to bring them together. Romeo sneaks into a party he shouldn't be in, sees this girl he shouldn't be seeing, all right? So you created this bridge which is plausible to everybody in the audience, which brings things together. The Music Man. Marion the Librarian's never going to get near this flim-flam guy, except that she has a little brother who really wants to learn to play an instrument. Yeah, you got it, okay. All of this, you have to have a plausible bridge. So what are the bridges? So there are two, I'm only going to talk about one of them. The two major bridges are creative process. You already know about creative process. If you break down your creative process, you will find it's exactly the same thing that a scientist does. They've got a challenge, they've got a problem, they've got a series of constraints. All of you have these problems, you don't have the resources you need, you don't have the kids really don't know how to act, so you have to teach them. I mean, scientists have all the same problems you do. Okay, so that's one really good bridge. The other are what my wife and I call thinking tools. And these are things, again, that everybody does. We all observe, we all abstract, we all form patterns, we all empathize, we all use our body, but we don't tend to teach any of these formally in our education systems anywhere. Okay, Patty Ron wouldn't have to have the kinds of programs she has if we were all learning how to empathize. We'd already know how to empathize and make connections and build teams if we were doing our education right. We have to actually add this in, which is really scary. All right, so these come out of a study which is in Sparks of Genius. We given lots of examples. There's lots of theater examples, dance examples, design examples in our book. So if you're looking for more information than I'm going to give you here, that's the place to go. Michelle and I looked at about 500 very creative people, said, what do they do? How do they do it? How do they describe what they're doing? And that's where those 13 thinking tools come from. We're not imposing them. This is drawn out of what people say they actually do. And so what I'm going to do is pick a few of these and show you how they can be bridges between STEM subjects and arts, crafts, design, theater, and so forth. The simplest and the most obvious is simply observing. Observing means honing all your senses to perceive acutely and accurately. And here I want to really emphasize it's all your senses. We tend to privilege in our education system visualizing, and that's about all. We need to hear, we need to touch, we need to smell, we need to taste. And obviously, if you're going to be a good actor, you have to know how all those things are going on, even if there really isn't a smell there. You have to pretend that there is a smell there, right? Things like that. So all of those different things. Clearly, actors do this. Clint Eastwood, you spend your life training to be an actor, observing people's characteristics so you can design characters around what you've seen. Kate Capshaw, the best preparation for acting is life, observing life and people and observing yourself. You probably know this. Have you explicitly explained this to your students? Have you explained to them how you observe? Do you give them observing lessons and test whether they're actually learning things? We certainly don't do this in sciences, and that's a real problem, as I'll show you in a moment. Beyond observing, there's perception. Perception is understanding how our body actually uses observation in all of our different senses. And there are direct uses of understanding perception for theater. And let me just give you a couple examples. Here's a photograph of a ghost. If you're a photographer, you probably know how you make a nice fake photograph like this. But what if you wanted to actually have a ghost appear in your play? Could you do that? Well, Jasper Johns studied lots about perception. And he's a wonderful artist to go to see how you can take perceptual science and apply it to things. He would paint flags in very unusual ways because he wanted people to learn to observe a flag as if they'd never seen one before. How do you do that? Well, one of the ways he did it was with this really weird American flag. Is he disrespecting the American flag? Is he, what's going on here? This could have all sorts of political implications, have all sorts of things. All right, what I want you to do is just stare. There's a little white dot in the very center there. Stare at that white dot without moving your eyes for, 5, 6, 7 seconds here. There's a ghost. That's totally in your mind, and yet you saw a regular American flag. All right, this is called complementary colors. It was invented by scientists or discovered by them. It was turned into textbooks. Artists explore these things. You can use these things if you understand enough about observing and perception. Many of you have probably done this without actually knowing what you're doing. So when you see a red shirt and blue pants, that's because we have white light coming in, which has all the different colors that are out there, right? So what a red shirt is doing is absorbing all the colors except the red and reflecting just the red. The blue pants are absorbing all the colors except the blue and reflecting the blue. If you put a person dressed in this costume under red light, the audience's eyes automatically adjust to the red light, and for reasons that have to do with how your brain works, we readjust our entire calibration of color to make that the center. We think that's white. It will reflect, the red shirt will reflect all the red light that's on it. Our brain will think that's a white shirt. Since there's no blue light to reflect, the pants have nothing to reflect, they're going to look black. You can play games with people. I actually know one play and several novels that play off of this kind of game because you can hide people, make them change costumes without ever having them change anything. It's really weird stuff. All right, imaging. Once you've observed, it's in your head, you have to do something with it, right? You have to be able to remember it, play with it in your mind. I'm not going to talk about playing, but playing is part of all the things we're talking about here. So imaging we can define as creating mental images of things observed or imagined using any or all of the senses. Again, remember, it's all your senses. I'll probably focus mainly on visual observing again, but Dennis the Menace here is a good way to remember. Okay, close your eyes, and if you see anything, you're thinking. This is a way of thinking, and this is one of the problems I think we have in academics when we're teaching kids is if it isn't verbal or mathematics, it's not thinking. That's not true. Everything I'm going to be telling you about are thinking tools. These are ways of thinking. They're just not the way we usually think about thinking. Actors clearly have to use their imaginations. On the left-hand side, this is something I pulled off of a slide share all about how to learn to become an actor. As an actor, you must use your imagination to make what happens on stage look real. The process of visualizing or imagining and seeing pictures in your mind is important if your theater experience is to have the greatest possible impact. Ella Fanning, to be an actor or actress, you have to feel on a deep level and tap into the emotions you've never felt before. You're imagining how something would be. Okay, so this is all imaging. In the case of Ella Fanning, it's imaging with all your different senses. Anybody who's blocked out, the stage action, you're imagining what it's going to be before you actually did it. And of course, if you didn't block it out right, the actors run into each other and you've got a problem. You've got to rethink it. Here's the important point. Scientists do exactly the same thing. Again, lots of science teachers don't do this well. Maybe they don't even think about it. But the greatest scientists all did exactly the same kind of thing. Here's a very famous experiment you may have heard about, which is Galileo thinking about dropping a small ball, light ball, and a big heavy ball off the Tower of Pisa, which, by the way, he never did. What he actually did was imagined what it would have been like to do that. And there's a slightly different version, which is what he really wrote about, which is he didn't just drop a big ball and a little ball and see how fast they dropped. What he did was to test something that Aristotle had said, which is that the rate at which they fall depends on their size and weight. So the small ball was supposed to drop very slowly, the big ball was supposed to drop really fast. And what Galileo imagines is, what if I tether the little ball to the big ball with a little tiny thread? Okay? I've now got something that weighs the equivalent of the addition of the two. So I drop all of three balls, well, if you want the two independent balls and the linked balls, off the tower. I jump off along with it. This is where the imagination comes in. Halfway down with my scissors, I cut the cord between the ones that are linked. And if I'm Aristotle, all of a sudden the little one's going to have to slow down dramatically. And the other bigger one's going to slow down a little bit because they're now both lighter than they were before. That makes no sense whatsoever. That's stupid. And that's basically what he says. That's a stupid, think about it. How could that possibly happen? They're going to fall at the same rate, all right? He didn't jump off the tower. He didn't really do that experiment, but it yielded really interesting results. We know from formal studies that the single most important tool, mental tool, that a student needs to be successful in STEM subjects is visual thinking ability. Kids who don't do well in STEM subjects can't literally see what's going on. They can't do what Galileo did. They can't imagine these experiments in their heads. The references I've got up here are a series of from about 25 studies where really innovative teachers have gone into middle schools, high schools, and colleges. They've taken kids who are not doing well, and these are often women and they're often minorities. They have simply given them art classes, design classes. Nobody's done theater so far, but I bet theater will work even better. For a year, not tied to any content whatsoever. Every student in every one of these studies improved in their STEM subjects. The number of kids who graduated increased. The number of kids who became scientists increased. The numbers who actually got degrees increased just from an art class. And it was directly tied to the fact that now they could see in their minds what people were talking about instead of just having these jumble of words which made no sense whatsoever. All right, abstracting. Abstracting is the process of eliminating all but some essence. You've observed, you've imaged, maybe you found patterns in things, but at some point there's too much information. We have to get down to what is the essence of whatever it is I'm trying to communicate. And I can tell you from my college seniors, most of them still don't know what's important from what's not important. They try and tell you everything they learned. I don't want to know everything you learned. I want to know if you got the principle. You have the basic idea. Can you communicate it clearly? And I'm sure that Patty Ron can tell you that's part of what she has to teach in communicating is what's the essence of the message and what's the simplest way to get it across. All right, so Picasso's doing this for us right here. He actually did a series of etchings over about 3 or 4 years. He starts out with something that's very realistic, and all observing starts out with something that's real, that's in front of us. I lost my picture. All right, so you can imagine this in your head. We've been talking about visual thinking. So he starts out with something real, and what, if you can remember the picture Jesus saw, as you're going across, what he was doing was playing with, first the mass. He actually makes his bulls bigger, heavier, blacker. Okay, he makes the horns bigger, he makes the genitalia bigger, you know, what's a bull, right? And then he starts realizing, this is too much. This isn't really what a bull is all about. So he starts thinking about, the planes of the bull. And he starts shaving some of the information away. And he says, maybe I don't even need these sort of basic planes. Maybe I can get rid of what's in them and just leave the outlines of the planes. So he starts getting these sort of strange outliney things. And eventually he gets down to what you would recognize as a Picasso, which is just sort of a series of lines that represent a bull. And what he's trying to get at is bullness, not a real bull, not the bull, but what's the essence of bull? Sounds like bull, doesn't it? All right. Oh, perfect. We're back up again. So that's what I was just talking about. Actors are doing the same thing. I found a whole bunch of actors talking about, the equivalent of stripping bare. So Glenda Jackson, acting is not about dressing up, acting is about stripping bare. The whole essence of learning lines is to forget them so you can make them sound like you thought of them that instant. The art of acting, according to Anthony Hopkins, is not to act. Once you show them more, what you show them, in fact, is bad acting. Boy, I had problems when I was trying to come up with this talk today because I had to keep stripping things out. There's so much I want to tell you. What's the essence? Get rid of all the stuff. I'm sure all of you have done this. You've seen one act play, or one person plays where somebody plays a whole bunch of different characters. One way of doing that is put on a different hat. That hat is an abstraction. It is now representing maybe whatever profession they're in. You've seen people do it by changing the way they hold their body. They change their voice. Each of those is an abstraction that allows you to get into that character very quickly. Actors who don't do this well try to do all that all at once, and it becomes confusing. There's way too much for them to try to handle all the time, and the viewers are trying to keep up with it. All these different changes. The simpler you do it, the more effective it is. The same with set design. I found this one. I think this is phenomenal. Okay, we're looking at a musical performance. Music is simply a set of notes which you put together. This person took cardboard boxes, painted them white, stacks them. That's the equivalent of all these notes. And then the chromatics of the music become the chromatics of the lighting. I mean, this is a phenomenal abstraction of what the music is about. It's really great, and it's so simple. It's inexpensive. It's easy to do. Scientists do the same thing. Mitchell Feigenbaum, who invented a whole area of mathematics called chaos theory. Very complex, very difficult. But at heart, what he's doing is just what we've been talking about. It's abundantly obvious that one doesn't know the world around us in detail, he says. What artists have accomplished is realizing that there's only a small amount of that stuff that's out there that's important, and then seeing what it was so they can do some of my research for me. And he means this literally. He would spend 2 or 3 days a week while he was developing chaos theory in art museums, because what he was trying to model were things like mountains and clouds and really, really complex things. And he looked at the artists and said, how do they portray a cloud? And the artist obviously doesn't give you all the detail of the cloud. He doesn't give you all the detail of the mountain. So what did they leave out? What can I leave out in making my models? All experimentation in science and engineering is like this. Here's a concrete example for you. Nico Tinbergen won a Nobel Prize. He loved animals, so he became one of the first people to study animal behavior in a formal way, and one of the things that he won his prize for was looking at gulls. So here is a gull and their baby chick. The baby chick is pecking at the beak, trying to get food, which seems like a fairly simple thing until you start analyzing it. Because when you look at that bird, first of all, is the chick pecking at the beak because of the smell? I mean, that's where the food is, right? That's where the food comes from. Is it because that's the beak, the big yellow thing sticking out there? Notice there's a little red dot. What's the red dot doing there? Does that have something to do with going, you know, how do you figure this out if you're a scientist? He did it as an artist. And by the way, he was trained in the arts, and he was a phenomenal photographer as well. First thing he does is he makes a model head. It's not very realistic here, but the first one is very realistic. All it's missing is the food. There's no food smell. You don't get any food out of it. Puts it in front of the chick, it pecks. Okay, you've eliminated one of the possibilities. It's not food smell. This is what science is about, eliminating each of the possible variables. So then he makes a whole bunch of new models. He takes off the red dot. He puts it in different places. He makes the head a different color. He changes the color of the beak. You name all these different things. And eventually what he discovers is all it has to be is red. It can be a red ball, a red pencil. If it's red, the chick pecks. This is kind of unexpected. You get food by pecking at something red. Okay, that's abstracting. All right, empathizing and play acting. Now we're getting into the kinds of things that you folks all do all the time. So that's becoming the thing you want to understand or recreate, and it could be animate or inanimate, and that's sort of what I want to develop here. Lots of different ways that you can learn to act. I'm sure you all know the method acting approach of Stanislavski, where he gets into the character by feeling what it's like to be that character, to talking like that character, dressing like that character. All of a sudden, he isn't him anymore. He's lost who he is, and he's become someone completely different. Not the only way to do it. So Patty Ron talked about empathizing as critical for connecting yesterday, and that's absolutely true, and certainly doctors need to learn how to do this just as much as, say, an actor does, and in fact, we now train doctors with actors. This is standard in most medical schools. You have to learn to be somebody else and to understand what they're doing. Patty also mentioned Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science, partially funded and developed by Alan Alda himself. We're now doing this with graduate students in sciences and even starting to do with undergraduates so that they can start to understand their audience, empathize with them, and communicate more clearly. This is also a creative strategy and a tool for scientists. The best scientists, although this is completely subjective, this is not the objective approach to science any of us are taught in school, nonetheless, the best scientists, every one of them, becomes the thing that they're trying to study. So Jane Goodall says she got all her ideas by becoming a chimpanzee. You can see her acting like one right here. Diane Fossey said the same thing. They never told anybody while they were actually doing their research because it was not scientific. But that's where the ideas came from. Then they had to somehow figure out an experiment which would make it objective so it would be okay for the scientists. But the creativity started with the empathizing. Oxford zoologist, who's also a surrealist painter, Desmond Morris, literally says you have to become the bug to understand the bug. So here he is as the bug, right? Nobel laureate Barbara McClintock literally went down the tube of her microscope, got down in there with the chromosomes she was studying, got so familiar with them that they became her friends. She developed literally what she called a feeling for the organism. And she said the really important part is that you forget yourself. You become an actor in this scene who's no longer a person. You are a friend, a chromosome, doing what they do. And I first heard about this from my mentor, Jonas Salk, who said, I became the polio virus to understand what it was doing. That's how you figure it all out. Then you have to prove it with experiments, but that's where the ideas come from. All right, so body thinking. Using muscle memory, physical feelings, gut reactions, emotional states to recognize, organize, and address problems. Follows right out of all that play acting and empathizing. Here we have Vivian has just read how different ways of moving can produce different ways of thinking. Whee! Wasn't that fun? All right, well, yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, the guy who invented the upside down, dispenser wasn't sitting there with a bunch of mathematical equations and even logical, written out things. He was sitting there doing what we all did, right? That's where the idea came from, and that's where it's, why the heck do I have to turn this on and I can't get it over right? You just don't turn it over. Now, there's a whole bunch of technology that goes into that little new cap, which has to be invented. But the basic idea comes out of how you feel about the thing and moving it differently. All right, you're all doing this. I don't have to go into this. I usually have to go and explain all this to people. You have all the stagecraft and the knowledge that you're doing. What you need to think about is this is all applied physics. When two guys are fighting, or guys and girls, or girls and girls, whatever it is, if they do it wrong, they're going to hurt themselves. This is physics. Okay, and if you bring the physics teacher and they can probably explain to you how the momentum is being used and how you can change it by rotating people around so that they don't hurt themselves. Wonderful experience when I went to Paris to propose to my wife. She sees me on the train station at midnight, comes running down. There's a wonderful Woody Allen movie thing, running down the street, and we didn't ever think about why those couples, when they run together, always twirl around. Bang! It was a nice reunion anyway, but we'll never forget that one. All right, Archimedes' discovery of density. He gets in the bath, displaces a bunch of water, right? There's a whole story here. There's a problem of some guy maybe stealing a king's gold. He's probably put lead in there. How can you tell whether there's been lead substituted for gold? All this kind of stuff. He gets in, displaces the water. He becomes the gold crown. And you suddenly realize that if you put a gold crown in water, it would displace a certain amount of water. The mass is him. Density, D, equals mass, him, the volume of the water he displaces in the bath. This is a script. Mass over volume, mass into volume, my mass into the volume of the bath. That's what that script just told you. And the density is what I displaced. So you can read this not as an equation and solve a bunch of putting numbers in. You can read this as a set of actions which Archimedes actually took. And I'm going to come back to that because this is really important. This is what the math teachers keep forgetting and the physics teachers keep forgetting. All right, everybody stand up who can stand up, please. We're going to do a little math here just to prove to you that you can all do some really sophisticated stuff. Friedrich Wilhelm Gauss. 7 years old, he's just learned how to add. The math teacher has given him this this is one of these really great things you do when you're a math teacher. Add all the numbers from 1 to 100. I'm not going to make you do this, but hold on. 1 to 100. It's great because it takes them about an hour. It's self-correcting. You either get the right answer or you don't. And the math teacher can go sit at their desk and do anything they want for that hour, right? It's really good. All right. So, he gives this to him. He's done this for years. He goes to his desk and he's going to do whatever it is. And Gauss, about 15 seconds later, says 5,050. And the teacher's like, "You cheated! How did you?" And he gets very angry and he starts yelling. Well, Gauss then says, "Well, here's what I did." So we're going to do what Gauss did. It's body thinking. What I want you to do, we're going to add all the numbers from 1 to 10, just to make it a lot easier and quicker. Now what I want you to do is put your left hand up here. And I want you to put the number 1 at your fingertip. And imagine a number line that goes to 10, 10 being at your elbow. Okay? Now I want you to do the same thing with your right hand. 1 at the fingertip, 10 down here. All right, now cross your arms so that your fingertips go to your elbows. 1 is now with 10 at this end. We have 2 with 9, 3 with 7, or 3 with 8. The other end we have, 1 with 10, 2 with 9. All right, add them together. 1 and 10 is 11, 2 and 9 is 11. They're all 11, right? How many 11s do we have? There are 10 of them, because there's 10 numbers across here. What's 10 times 11? 110. We've done it twice, so we have twice as much as we need. Divide in half, and it's 55. You just solved a problem that takes the average person, if they write it out, about 5 minutes in about 15 seconds. This is what Gauss did. He simply put the number lines in his body and he said, "Okay, let's play with them." Body thinking. Thank you. Sit down. Here's the math for it. This is what scares kids away from math. But if you look at that again as a script, along the top line, it's 1, 2, in this case, n would be 10. And the other one below it is reversed, 1 through 10. It's simply those arms you put together. You sum them. That's the next line below the dark line there. This is how mathematicians write out what you just did. And then since you've done it twice, down at the bottom you have to divide by 2. That's what that equation means. This is not how math is taught. This is why kids look at this equation and they go, "What the heck is that? I don't know." You're math phobic because you don't understand what it means. It meant a series of physical operations. It always did, and for some reason, we've left them all out. So this gets to transformational thinking. And I'm coming near the end here. This is using several of the tools in an integrated manner to raise and solve problems. You, again, do this all the time, so I don't have to explain this to you. You end up with a script. Here's My Fair Lady. You end up with the music for My Fair Lady. You have to integrate them into something. Does the script explain the set, the staging? Does it explain where the actors move? Does it explain how they're dressed? I mean, you have to do all this stuff. You have to bring that script to life. That's what we're missing in STEM education. Physicist Jacob Shaham on transforming. Acting taught me how to read equations like a script with characters I had to bring to life. 16 years old, he had his first acting experience. He was given one line. Hi. Except when he started thinking about it, was it hi? Or hi? Or hi? I mean, how many ways can you think of acting high? And he's sitting there going, I have to know what the situation is. I have to think about who the character is. I have to think about their personality. I have to think about who they're interacting with. There's all this stuff which goes beyond the script. This is true of those equations. Maxwell's equations talk about the movement of an electron through a magnetic field. I've talked to people at Caltech and MIT. Every student at those institutions can do all the math. They can prove the theorems. They can do all that kind of stuff. A third of them are able to take those equations and tell you what's happening. And if you take them out of context and put them in another context, only a third of those students can tell you how the interpretation of those equations changes. They can't do physics, even though they can do the math, because they can't translate the math into what's really going on. It's a script. We're not teaching it as a script. The best scientist knows these are scripts. They write scripts. My wife wrote a book recently called Inventing Imaginary Worlds. If you're interested, you're all inventing imaginary worlds. There are ways of integrating imaginary world play into all of the curriculum. This is just one of the quotes she found. She's got dozens for scientists and everybody else. As a scientist, I imagine possible worlds that are closely based on my understanding of aspects of the real world. In other words, I try to imagine a story with a very strong plot and characters that completely meshes with the real world, yet reveals the world in a new way. So this was a neurobiologist. He says, neurons and synapses are as vivid to me as knights and pawns to the chess player, as vivid as food on the table or flowers in a garden to the average person. Okay, those are his characters. Liz Lerman, who's a choreographer, works a lot with scientists to get ideas for her dances. At one point she asked, what if scientists were choreographers? Well, many of them are. Maybe not in the way you think about it, but here's a wonderful example. John Cairns was working at Woods Hole, one of the premier experimental institutions in the country. He was off to a folk dance, which they had every Saturday night. He ran into one of his colleagues and said, I have a brilliant idea. I got this experiment I want to do. And the guy said, well, let's dance it out. So literally, each one took a character. I'm the gene, I'm the bacteria, and I'm going to be the chromosome, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And they each did their different thing. And about 5 minutes in, they realized that the gene had to be 2 places simultaneously, and you can't do that. Oh. John Cairns went back and sulked. His friend went off to the dance. You can dance out an experiment. Zafra Lerman, who's not related as far as I know to Liz Lerman, actually has her chemistry students do this at the Chicago, I've forgotten the name, CCC, College of, I'm blanking on that one. Anyway, she takes her students, many of them are lower income kids, not good backgrounds. They have to try and learn their chemistry, so she does things like, okay, we're going to have a chemical reaction, except you're going to become the characters. So what happens, for example, when the couple sodium and hydroxide come to the dance, and they happen to meet hydrogen and chloride, or another couple. And if you know what happens when you mix these, you literally get a lot of heat. So the action really heats up, and they have to write out a script, they have to explain the basic chemistry, but they also have to have a whole story about this. So they really, really remember this stuff. Every experiment is a logical story embodied, literally embodied as a series of processes that have to be carried out through space and time by people acting on things. That's what you folks do. That's what you make the connections with your science, math, and other colleagues. So the conclusion here is all this leads to synosia. Synosia is a term that my wife and I ended up having to make up because nobody, we got this mind-body, Cartesian separation of all our feelings from the way we think, but we think it's all integrated. So synesthesia is one of the components. Synesthesia is using all your different senses. You all do this in theater. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge, formal knowledge. Put them together, you get synosia. So synosia is knowing and feeling simultaneously. It's objective and subjective. It's intuitive and analytical. It's embodied and cerebral. And here's a perfect example. These are every single one of our thinking tools embodied in one incredible ad. Apple does some astounding things. You are observing. This is an abstraction. They have taken out everything that doesn't have to be there. And yet, when you observe that abstraction, you become empathetic with the individual. You feel in your body what he's doing. You want to do that, right? I want that thing if it's going to make me feel this way. And yet you also have knowledge of what that product does for you. That's formal analytical knowledge. So you know what you feel and you feel what you know, And look how simple it is. And that's the tough part, is getting it down to that simplicity. All right, Sheldon is supposedly totally logical. He's not. You know he gets frustrated. You know that he gets excited when he breaks a breakthrough and nobody understands what he's talking about. You know that when Archimedes made that breakthrough about density, he jumped out of his tub and he ran naked down the streets of Athens shouting, "Eureka! Eureka!" I mean, that's the part we keep leaving out of STEM education. And it doesn't mean anything to know something if you don't care about it. So I started out with why me? Now I want to ask why you? And again, I want to develop off of Patty Ron's wonderful talk yesterday. She had that wonderful joke about, an actor and a lawyer and a, doctor walk into a bar, and the bartender says, "Is this a joke?" Right? And then she followed it up with, an actor and a director and a carpenter and, all the other things that you folks do. And of course, that's you. And what I want to do is add on and a scientist and a technologist and an engineer and a mathematician, because even though you may not think of yourself that way, I hope all the examples I've given you today show you that you embody that knowledge. You apply it every time you have a performance. And all we really need to do is make that unexplicit knowledge you already have, that practical, applied knowledge, and pull it together with the analytical, objective stuff that the science teachers are doing. And we have STEAM, we have SEED, we have teams, we have whatever you want to call it. So what I want to do is to celebrate the fact that theater productions literally, and I mean this, have it all. And I want to thank you for all the things that you do, because you pull all of it together. Theater people embody and actually enact more integration than any other group that exists. Thank you so much for everything you do.
We're going to take, I think, maybe 2 questions, because we need to move very quickly. We're going to apply a little physics to the stage and reimagine this for our panel. So I'd like to just suggest that we'll take 1 or 2 questions. If they have one, please step up here to the microphone, which I see through the answer. There we go. Anybody have a question? Clock is ticking.
The answer is I don't know.
And I certainly don't know. Yes. All right.
Is it possible for all of us to get this amazing slideshow?
Yes. I'm glad that
Yes. Bob has offered to sell it to me for $100, so we're good. No.
Wait, I thought that was 1,000.
This is a math moment. So we have another question. Okay. All right. Paul.
Hi, being as someone that does deal with both, because actually, as some people know, I'm also a math teacher. And so dealing with both, how do you suggest that we go about explaining to principals who don't understand that connection, to get them to understand that theater and art in general is just as important as math and science, because it's best when they're used together.
Right. And
if you can, when you teach math, if I can do it in such a way that I can get the kids who don't see numbers but understand the physicality, how that helps. How do you suggest those who, so many art teachers and so many theater teachers go in and say, I hate math, and they don't understand that's the same as the other teachers not understanding what they do. So how do we go about making sure that both groups understand the importance of each other, and how do we get that across?
So I think the 2 main things are to open a dialogue with the people on the other side of whatever it is. You're actually both. That's fantastic. Most of you probably aren't both. One of the reasons that we wrote Sparks of Genius was to give you a common language. You know that you're observing, you know that you're abstracting, you know, I mean, everybody in every field uses this language. Unfortunately, tend to hide behind our disciplinary language and, you know, pretend that we're better because you don't know what I'm talking about. I think Patty actually mentioned this yesterday. So we need to develop this common language. We also need to talk about the common process of, you know, setting up a problem, understanding the constraints on it. A lot of people in the sciences don't understand that artists have constraints. I mean, it's astounding. Yeah, artists just get some fun with painting and does whatever they feel like it. Well, no, sorry, that's not what happens. And certainly you folks have an incredible number of constraints, which involve everything from, you know, money, space, and time to the people and whether you can get the script and everything else. Some of that needs to be explained explicitly because people literally don't think about those things. More importantly, what we've been doing, and again, I will include, well, actually, it's going to be in the slides here, that SEED website has those 150, you know, best practices kinds of things, experts from all sorts of different disciplines talking about why this is critical. It's got some of the data that we have. It has a draft of all of the 75 gold standard, you know, teaching curricular kinds of things that have been vetted and so forth. So if a group of parents or a school board or your principal needs to know that there is real hardcore evidence, it's there, and you can just give them that. If you need other stuff, my wife and I have done things like little one-pagers. I mean, we've gotten these published in anywhere from the Chronicle of Higher Education to the LA Times editorial page, or, you know, whatever it is, so that they're for all sorts of different groups. And I'm happy to share those with you. So.
All right, so we're going to apply a little physics to the stage here. And so hold your seats, because we're going to be back in about just a matter of a few minutes with our panel, which will include Bob and Patty Ron and Lucinda Presley of the Innovation Collaborative. So just sit still for a few minutes, and we'll start up here in just a few moments. Thank you.
I'm sorry to make your thing go off, but we like to make you...
You came up with the right plan. It was actually just... If it was going to happen, that was a good place to have it. Do we need to release this in some way?
Well, I don't think so. I think we're all right. Michael, you do it all. This one's hot all the time, so be careful. It's
Great. Okay, we will get started in just 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and here is the suggestion. There is room closer up if you might want to consider moving up a little bit to really get the full impact of the panel. Thank you. This one? Yeah. No. Okay.
We'll be ready for lunch. When do you think you'll break from this? Should be 12:30. Okay, it's about 1 hour. Okay, perfect. Great.
I would say, I didn't really get you in the end. I was going to put you in the middle of the last chair. Whoever sits next to me.
Seems like we have an extra chair. I'm not very good at this. Oh, I got it.
You and I get to share.
So here's, I guess if you guys might share these, here's yours. They're
Thank
live, so don't say curse words. Hi, I'm talking to you.
Waiting for a Let me.
Well, that's really funny because when I was walking over there was on the table. You put it on the table. Well, I actually think you sent it to me. So here's what I did about it. I was like, so sorry.
Testing.
So you usually have yellow. Okay. 4, what number are you? 3. And 8, that's logical.
All right, so welcome back to our panel. Please take your seats. And I just want to, for a second, just thank Bob again for his brilliant presentation. He addressed so many of the things that we're going to talk here in our panel called the Creative Spark of STEAM. Before we get started, I want to thank our panel sponsor, TAMS Whitmark Music Library, and the online ticketing software provider, Seat Yourself, for sponsoring the panel. So please, round of applause. And again, if we have virtual attendees, though I cannot see them, they are a ghost, we welcome them as well. So you have already met two of our panelists, Bob and Ron on the end. In the middle, we have a new panelist, and I would like to introduce her. She is Lucinda Presley, founder, chair, and executive director of the Innovation Collaborative, a nonprofit organization that identifies and disseminates information about the many ways that effective integration of the sciences, the arts, and humanities, engineering, and the use of technology reinforces teaching and incorporates lifelong learning in both in-school and out-of-school settings. You can find out more about the collaborative by attending Lucinda's workshop this afternoon at 2 o'clock. That's Defining Intersections this afternoon. And I want to add one more thing before we get started. You might note we have an empty chair on the end. That's to acknowledge the visionary researcher, Dr. James Catterall, who was to be our fourth panelist. He passed away unexpectedly August 23rd. It's a tremendous loss for his family, his team at the Center for the Research on Creativity, and all of his many collaborators and friends in arts education. Writing in the esteemed journal, Dr. Catterall said this: "The revisionist delegation has sidled up to STEM. Here were educators convinced that the arts had a legitimate place in science and technology education. The point was not that you couldn't teach physics and mathematics without the arts, but that artistic expression and principles could assist learners in structuring and organizing ideas, exploring disciplinary and cross-disciplinary connections, and solving scientific problems." Thank you, Dr. Catterall. So with that, I would like to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introductory statement about their perspective and work around STEAM-based education. And Lucinda, as you're our newbie, perhaps you would like to start before we move into some other questions.
My focus in my work.
Lucinda.
My focus in my work is really looking at how these important intersections promote creative and innovative thinking skills in our kids. So teaching our kids to think as we deliver the content. The content's really important, but we need to develop an innovative workforce that these kids are going to be a few years from now. So in the collaboratives work, which is EdTA is an important part of it, we are researching what are the effective practices that promote these thinking skills. In my work, in my own institution, I work with NASA and several other national partners, and we're doing the same thing, researching how do we promote these skills, especially as we teach science, using art strategies, not only the visual art, but especially theater arts. And then in my work as a college instructor, I do the same thing with my art students. So it's all about learning to think. And I work with Sandy Chapman, who's Bob is one of the collaborative's research thought leaders, and a neuroscientist has shown that by intersecting disciplines and using them to solve a problem, students and we are creating important neuronal connections. So that's my passion.
Hi, most of you met me yesterday. I'm Patty Ron, and I guess what I'm particularly interested in, I've always felt that theater was the ultimate education, and I appreciate getting validation of that at the end of Bob's talk today. But I'm interested in real collaboration, and rather than thinking about any discrete disciplines, thinking about how we actually each might transcend disciplinary boundaries and find ways to all become fully developed human beings, because I think the problems of the current world and certainly the future world have everything to do with using our whole selves and our whole communities to address those problems. And I think any disciplines are antithetical to real collaboration.
So Bob, we heard so much from you, but I would still ask you perhaps to give the briefest of statements. You can tell a joke if you want, but.
So, I'll just tell you really briefly about my latest book, which is on artists, musicians, and performers as scientists and inventors. So real skeptics of STEAM have said, you know, if these tools are so important, why aren't we seeing artists, you know, contributing to the sciences and engineering and so forth? Well, they have been. I've been able to find about 120 really fundamental scientific or discoveries or inventions. I'll just give you a really easy example to remember. If you were to take out your cell phone and look at it, the way that you are all able to use your cell phone simultaneously in this room, and to do so in a way that no one can listen in on you except maybe the NSA, is because of three people, basically, all of whom were in the arts. One's a collaboration between Hedy Lamarr and George Antheil, Hedy Lamarr being the actress, George Antheil being one of the most radical 1920s, 1930s composers. And the other is the work of Joseph Schillinger, who trained virtually every major jazz musician for, you know, during the 1930s and 40s. He developed a whole theory of the mathematical basis of the arts and music, and he actually has a book called that. The insights that these two sets of people had basically form the actual encryption algorithms which are used to allow you to do all your communicating. You haven't heard of this, probably because the scientists and engineers, when they take the information, just sort of strip away. It's very embarrassing for them to admit that they didn't invent it. And so what I've been trying to do is to reconstruct a lot of these fundamental discoveries and bring them out in a book and say, you know, the arts are valuable. Artists and performers and musicians doing what they do best, the way they do it, make really fundamental contributions to our understanding of the world. So.
Thank you. So let's dive a little closer into this fundamental question about STEAM education. How does STEAM education really nurture creativity, imagination, and innovation? Bob, you touched on this in so many different ways, but I'd like to hear from Patty and Lucinda about their perspectives.
I think that anytime any of us are exposed to something new, it's exactly as Bob talked about in his great talk this morning. We start to see places that lines that we didn't understand as intersecting are intersecting, and then there is, in fact, innovation. And I think that happens when any two ideas meet and are explored deeply enough to find the intersection. We just happen to be really good at it because we've got a lot of very unusual people intersecting. So I think that we could be the area that this kind of innovation and creative work is home for a lot of disparate kinds of people.
And we're studying it in the Innovation Collaborative, the DC group that Bob and Jim and now Patty are a part of. We have a formal K-12 study, and we're in year 4, and I brought up some of the findings from our classroom study, which involved science and arts and humanities teachers last spring. One of the findings was the teachers implemented lessons that were using these intersections, and we looked at attitudes, but we did a great deal of qualitative analysis. So, because there are not many instruments that capture, and I know you all see the richness of the thinking and the content understanding when the kids are operating at these intersections. But we saw a 15.2%, which is small, but it was amazing given the students we were working with, increase in the interest in school, in the interest in STEM. These are from arts kids because most of the teachers implementing this were arts teachers. We also asked the kids at the end of their attitudinal survey, what is creative thinking? And the kids I worked with, this was a very low SES school. You can really relate, very low SES school, the end of May. It was after testing, so the kids' engagement was pretty minimal. What we found, though, in using these intersections to do inventions, these were to solve a problem on Mars, were that the kids were unbelievably innovative and creative. And we asked them, what is creative thinking? And a lot of the descriptions we got were actually almost textbook descriptions of creative thinking, such as creative thinking is being able to take ideas and change it into something else. It's where math, reading, science, and art are combined and you can make something out of it. Where you think of something no one else has ever thought of and create that thought. When you put two completely different things together. These are fifth graders. So we're seeing the richness of these thinking skills we want, and we are developing, with Bob's help, we're developing instruments that can capture this, then that funders, school administrators, district personnel, and even the STEAM caucus in Congress can present to really help us move the education field forward. Yeah.
Actually, it takes me right to our next question, which is, and this is a sort of policy, political question in its way. You know, there's a lot of discussion around STEAM education. You know, it's actually embedded in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Opportunities to realize a well-rounded education include teaching and learning in STEAM. So, how does it seem that the arts truly fit into the STEAM movement in a very, you know, practical and political way? Thoughts?
The things that are in my mind right now are about what the sciences and mathematics and engineering can actually bring to the arts. I think quite often we are we're thinking, well, why should we give up the intrinsic value of our discipline to be serving instrumentally in these other disciplines? But I think, yeah, we got some applause on that. I think both can be achieved, that we can understand our work in much more complex ways by intersecting with all folks from not just science, technology, engineering, and math, but all sectors, you know, policy folks, and I think we just need to reach out across boundaries, because we know that we can be instrumental, valuable to other disciplines, but I also think, just really selfishly, they can be instrumental.
This is where you all come in. You all are the critical component to this movement. It's not going to happen unless arts educators really are able to help us show the importance of the arts. And the arts not only are critical, it's the thinking skills that you all deliver that no one else can. I came from the arts world originally, but have lived in the STEM world for about 13 years. And what's amazing is that the STEM world is now beginning to be very, very interested in these skills, because they're going to deliver the workforce that we need. But it's up to us as arts professionals to develop the anecdotal information, develop the data that tells these guys who like numbers or like some qualitative anecdotal information that this is the most important part of this movement.
Can I just interrupt here? I would also like to say that the fastest growing job sector in the Northeast is creative technologies. So it's not that science and mathematics are going to necessarily always deliver the job force that we need. I think we will also deliver the job force that we need.
I think part of the problem is simply needing to address what the policy makers are thinking. In many cases, we don't know what that is. I keep trying to get people to go out and actually fund a study where we can go to all of our senators and congressmen and say, why are you not supporting the arts, so that we can address those things. Informally, we've done some of this. Some of it comes down to very basic things like, if I've got a limited budget, what am I going to cut? You know, what am I going to fund? Part of our research over the last few years has been doing a series of studies looking at who actually founds new companies, who files new patents and so forth. It's just like the data I showed you on the Nobel Prize winners. it turns out that the people who are actually filing the patents, the people who are actually founding new companies, are almost always engaged in the arts from kindergarten all the way through their professional lives. And they're very explicit about the fact that the arts are where they're getting their creativity from. So, you know, that's part of what we need to do, is figure out how can we address issues like budgets? How can we address issues like, if there's limited time, how do you do this in the most effective way? Again, one of the things that I've been pushing as a policy is we have to stop dividing all the subjects into different disciplines. That's very easy for a specialist to deliver. Imagine if you were to try to deliver a theater production, if the lighting people only did lighting and actually never interacted with anybody else. The musicians never practiced with the performers. The performers didn't know that there was going to be music. You know, I mean, this is the way we are educating our kids. The math is separate from the physics, is separate from the biology, is separate from the English, is separate. My students in science can't read well enough to learn the language. You learn more new vocabulary in a science class than you do in a foreign language class. They don't know how to learn language because their language learning isn't any good either. I mean, so all of this has to be put back together, and you people already put it together. You already know that you have to have all this integrated. Everybody has to know what everybody else is doing. That's the model we should be moving back towards.
Good. I know, good.
This is really important, and again, where you come in. In the collaborative, we work with the STEAM caucus in Congress, which is a bipartisan caucus focusing on integrating the arts with STEM in education, and they were responsible for helping pass the ESSA Act that included strong arts presence. They're now up to about 88 members. And we have some of our teachers that are working with us that have talked to their congressmen and asked them to please join this caucus to support the importance of the arts, because there is an arts caucus, but this is the arts and STEM. And so this caucus is becoming very influential. So you as a person, find out who your congressman or congresswoman is, find out who your senator is, make them aware of this caucus, and let them know what a difference they can make for your students by being a part of the caucus.
Yeah, I would only add to that, many of you participated in our Arts Advocacy Day, and one of our asks was focused around full funding of Title IV Part A, which articulates funds for meeting the well-rounded needs in all subject areas. And there's some siloization going on there, and I like Bob's point, let's break that down and advocate for all of them in an integrated way. However, there is the opportunity to gain funds that are specifically dedicated to professional development that in some cases, let's say, would allow you to become better prepared and informed teachers of STEAM-based education. Oh, there. So let's talk about theater a little bit. How, actually, in a very specific way, is theater realized in individual areas of STEAM? And interestingly, I wanted to bring up an example of what knowledge does a student need to have of color in order to do lighting. And Bob, you so wonderfully brought up your example of the pants and shirt and ghosting. So could we just address some specifics? And I'm sure people in the audience might have some ideas as well. Go ahead.
So in what I work with a lot with light and color from visual art and theater, looking at and science, looking at how do these colors impact your perception, and what it really would help theater production to be aware of is how the use of color not only impacts what happens on your retina, but how your brain perceives emotion. So color is very, as you know, it's very emotion related. Not only the lighting or how you mix colors and light, because mixing colors and light is very different than mixing colors and pigment. and what happens, we'll do this this afternoon in my session, what happens when you mix all the colors and light and then interrupt that light. Can you use that as part of your dramatic presentation? Also, when you have actors in different colors on stage, that's going to impact what the audience pays attention to or not. So light and color is instrumental in a dramatic production.
I can talk a little bit, having spent years as a theater administrator, that if we don't know physics, we don't produce good health and safety results. If we're going to build a staircase, we have to understand the physics of that assembly. And I think that's just a really tangible, Bob talked about stage combat. Almost everything we do is connected to physics, and it's up to us to articulate that, and not just say, well, we just build things. It's easy for us to diminish the complexity of what we do, and usually I think simplifying is the answer, but sometimes in this world, making it clear that we are doing very complicated processes is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that virtually any special effect you're doing in any kind, I mean, you have the steam bubbling out of something, you have smoke going across. I mean, this is all chemistry, just to add in another area. And you can kill people if you do it wrong. You mix the wrong chemicals, you can have real problems. There are ways of making smoke, and actually Hollywood took many years. Some of those things that the actors inhaled that they were putting in smoke weren't good for them, but they didn't actually know that at the time. All this is knowledge that you can use to get your kids from their perspective, because they have a real problem, they need to produce something, they're interested in doing this, to now learn the chemistry, and then your chemistry teacher can work off of that knowledge. You know, it's just a bridge. You find something that's a natural way of getting them to want to know something, and then push it from there.
There are also, I think, all kinds of questions around neuroscience that I think acting will be involved in over the next several years. One of the questions that I want somebody to answer is, when an actor is living a role, is it the same as if they weren't living a role, but living their lives? I'm interested to see the lights of the neuroscience things on that one, the studies of the brain.
So the neuroscientist we work, can you hear me okay? So the neuroscientist we work with out of UT Dallas has a huge brain health institute with about 400 scientists that are all different kinds of scientists and physicians and technologists that are looking at what's happening in the brain. And they have done research, extensive research on middle school students, because they say the adolescent brain is where the changes really become permanent. And what the strategies they're giving us as educators, and this is where theater comes in, is that when you, there are 3 steps to get the students to first strategically attend to information. So if you have a dramatic plot, what are the most important parts of that? So just getting to the gist. And then synthesizing. So if they're synthesizing the lighting and the physics and the theater components, then they take that to solve a problem. For us and for them, they're actually creating actual neuronal connections in their frontal lobe. And from 7th grade up, those connections are permanent for us too. So those strategies are really important. And the head of the institute, who's a part of our collaborative, Sandy Chapman, says that the arts are very, very important part of this synthesis.
I just want to add another part that I think is really fascinating, is the science of storytelling. You all probably know the research that suggests if I tell you a vivid story with vivid sensory details, your brain lights up in the same places that my brain lights up. It's as if you are literally experiencing that with me. And so Bob's story about meeting his wife in Paris, I had a physical impact experience as he was telling the details of that.
actually, somewhat related to that is the fact that there are now a series of studies. Actually, National Institutes of Health just collaborated with National Endowment for the Arts. They've just come out with a study that shows that people who continue to be involved with the arts over their lifetime age much more successfully. They're much healthier for a much longer time than people who don't. This corroborates studies that have been already done in Europe, in Finland, and places like that. So there's something about the sociality of being engaged in the arts and using your brain in creative ways and so forth that's going to allow us to actually age much better as our lifespan extends. And one of the things that we found in our studies of scientists is this depends on what you get in school. People who are introduced to the arts in elementary school are much more likely to continue doing arts through their schooling, as long as they have access to it, and to then do it as an adult. It's much harder for people to get into the arts, say in college or after they've graduated or whatever. The probability that they're going to get involved with arts and stick with it is almost nil. So we need, just for health reasons as well as creativity reasons as well, I mean, the list is huge. We need to make arts a central part of everybody's education from the very beginning for almost every reason you can imagine. And why our policymakers haven't figured this out is beyond me.
That is a question that I wish we could all answer today, but we probably won't. But here's a question. This is a question actually for you, Lucinda, because this is kind of your territory. So how can theater educators incorporate effective practice thinking skills into their classrooms and on their stages?
Thank you. Yes, we've been studying this in classrooms, in arts and sciences classrooms for a couple of years, especially the study in the last spring showed us there's some specific thinking skills that bring this to bear. So one of the most important is involving them in problem-based learning. Give them a problem that they have to solve, and they go through the steps, defining the problem, narrowing it down to making it doable within the materials or the constraints that they have. Also then generating lots of ideas, but as they generate lots of ideas, being really aware of evaluating the ideas. How many of you all have students who, when coming up with ideas, just throw stuff out whether it relates or not? They just like to be heard. Yeah. So given what's happening today, we need our students to really be able to evaluate information. That's an important skill. And as they're doing this, and we found that these skills, in this study, found that these skills do generate the creative and innovative thinking that we need. Also, like Bob talked about, having them abstract, get to the big idea. And that's a neuroscience principle also. Comparing and contrasting, changing perspectives, being the theater person, then putting on the science hat. And then taking them both off and being both at the same time, but being able to look at things from different perspectives. Synthesizing, being able to put these ideas together seamlessly, and then being able to create. For you all, it's a dramatic production, but then responding is really important. Responding to others' productions, responding to your own, responding to another team's ideas as you all work through the process, and then brainstorm ideas together. These are the thinking skills that our experts like Bob and the other thought leaders and all of the institutions involved in this helped identify at the beginning of this process, and we're iterating still, but we're seeing that these are really strong thinking skills for your students to really use.
So here's a little bit different question. You know, we talk a lot about neuroscience and cognition and technical theater, but can theater address STEAM dramatically? And Patty, you sort of touched upon this through storytelling, so I'm going to toss that one over to you first.
I guess I have an opinion about this. I don't have evidence, but it's intuition that we can address it directly if the storytelling is good. Certainly in productions, in plays like The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, or Proof, or many of these science-y stories. As long as the storytelling is strong, the dramaturgy is strong, then it's good. I have had a lot of experience with not so good dramatic storytelling that I think does both the science and the theater a disservice. So we have to depend on our expertise in terms of curating those pieces. Just not everything that's about a science event is good theater. So that's probably not very PC for me to say.
How many of you are involved with Science Olympiad? Anybody? Well, if you have Science Olympiad at your school, which you might, talk to your science teachers, because one of the components of Science Olympiad is that the students have to get together and they actually have to do what Patty Ron's been talking about. They have to, as a group, collaborate to present, often as a dance, a musical, something. It has to be very effective, whatever their science idea or invention was. The kids who come out of these programs are highly sought by colleges because they have a whole set of skills that the regular science students don't, including communication skills, collaborative skills, and things like that. And major universities like MIT are learning this the hard way. So one of the first things I did about 25 years ago when I started doing STEM to STEAM stuff was I got a call from the provost at MIT who said, I want you to come out and consult with us for a couple of days because we just found something very disturbing. We did a study of the Harvard graduates, engineers, and the MIT graduate engineers about 20 years out into their workforce. We expected, of course, that our MIT people would be outperforming the Harvard people because, we're a better school and we're much more focused on engineering and all that kind of stuff. Now, what we actually found was sort of the opposite. So the MIT engineers were just as good at engineers as the Harvard engineers, except that they all worked for the Harvard engineers. So I said, we're trying to figure out why. It became really clear really fast that the reason was that the MIT people got only technical training. The Harvard people went through a liberal arts training. It's Harvard, it's liberal arts, right? So they had to take history courses and writing courses, and a lot of these kids were involved in theater or art or marching band what these things teach you, all those skills that have to do with leadership and organizing people and communicating, which the MIT people didn't get. So MIT had to change their curriculum to give their kids these skills. That's what Science Olympiad is doing for these kids. And at some level, it is theater. It's directly what you already do. You could be really beneficial to the science students in making them see all the things that Patty's been talking about and actually apply these on a competitive basis and do a better job.
And I have a way to practically give you some hints too for your practice. In K-12, I work with NASA on the Mars project, have for years in K-12, and we have the kids learn the science through the arts, and they have to solve a problem that NASA gives them. For example, 5th grade has to invent a machine that will provide sustainable water resources. Where you come in is helping them be able to communicate it. You could contact your science teacher, ask what project they're working on, because when these kids in a science class come up with an invention or a solution to a problem, because many science STEM teachers are doing PBL, then we make them defend it. So they have to write a defense like a real scientist. They have to write an explanation of their findings, why it works. But then we have them practice it dramatically so that they can engage the audience and help the audience understand better instead of just sitting up there reading. I know you all have seen this where your kids just sit up there and read. So getting them to help an audience understand the science. So partnering with your STEM teacher or the science teacher would be really wonderful for you guys and for them.
I don't want us to sound like we're saying, and then you should also do this, and you should also do this, and on top of your 14-hour workdays, you should also do this. I think there may be creative ways for you to invite the other teachers in your areas to come into your rehearsals or productions so they can help you identify. It does sound like we are actually the answer to everybody's problem. So, but we don't have time in the day to meet those needs. So I think that may be a really interesting question for future conferences, is how do we find efficiencies of time to do this kind of collaboration? Are there grants or fellowships that we could provide or create that would allow teachers to do collaborative work, buyouts for a semester or something like that? I think there are some, we need to think through the policy of time and money to provide you all with, or cloning. That would also be an interesting scientific approach.
Exactly right, Patty. Perfect.
I would also suggest that, when you have problems, I was listening at breakfast this morning, some of you have ancient electrical systems and lighting and so forth. I would suggest you go to the science teachers and even better, the science students and the classrooms and say, we have this problem. We would really like to be able to. We have unbelievably bright kids. They don't look at things the way we do. They don't look at a budget. They just sort of go, oh, I know how to do that. That's why I take my computer problems to my 10-year-old, right? Because the 10-year-old already knows how to solve these things. We need to enlist other people in our communities to help us out by telling them what would make our theater productions work better. Because I will bet that a lot of them would love to get engaged. I would have loved to do things during, junior high school, high school. I didn't know that these things were even problems. I didn't know that there were opportunities. So they might actually be able to save you some of your work, give you solutions to problems you don't see how you can do workarounds where it costs virtually nothing, but a science teacher already has it, or somebody's dad has this stuff in their garage they're getting rid of, and you can use it. Let them be, give them the challenge, let them see what they can do with it. And that's doing basically what Lucinda's doing formally. This is now informal.
So I want to make sure we have a few minutes for Q&A. And in some ways, I'm going to put the first question out there, which you guys have already basically addressed, was why would a science educator want to work with me? And to be more blunt about it, what's in it for them? So I'll just start with that question, which you really have been talking about anyway. You want to just comment on that a little further, and then we'll open the floor up.
I don't know if I have an answer to that particular question, but I will say that we used to give an award at Virginia Tech called Look, Mom, I'm No Longer an Engineer. I'm very, very popular with the parents. Because we can provide real hands-on engagement with problem solving for scientists and engineers, exactly as we were just discussing. They don't have the opportunity to apply the things they're learning in really exciting ways. And quite often, they are isolated and, in need of a social life and a community and a tribe, just like we all are. So I think the theater can give scientists and engineers and mathematicians an interesting tribe and practical problems to solve.
In K-12, it would be extremely helpful, since I've seen a great deal. The science teachers, and on the test, in a number of state tests, they're tested on the process skills, observing, asking a question, experimenting, and then coming up with a solution. That's what you all do. And the teachers I work with aren't even aware the theater arts department in their school could really, through the thinking skills you all deliver anyway, work together to give the students in STEM these thinking skills so that they, like Bob says, there's transfer that can happen, that they could take these thinking skills out of one discipline and see that it applies to another. They're really struggling with this. So the problem solving and the process skills that you all innately deliver are exactly what they need.
Yeah, and all of this, I think, is going to become very explicit around March next year. I'm going to make a prediction. I've been involved with the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. They have been doing a 2-year-long study on whether, this is specifically for undergraduate, graduate, and professional training, whether students should have to have arts, crafts, design, so forth. It really, really looks like they're going to say yes. Well, that's going to mean that students who already have these experiences coming into college are going to be a premium, because they're going to be the ones who are actually going to be able to take advantage of the arts in these college curricula. It means that there's going to be a trickle-down effect of, graduate schools, medical schools, engineering schools saying, we want this in the curriculum, we want students who can do this, which means all the policymakers are going to have to sit down and go, if we want our students to get into the good colleges, maybe we need to put the arts back into our high schools and our other secondary schools, maybe even push it down into our elementary schools. So look out for next March, look for the National Academy report. I think they're going to really start transforming the way we look at all this, and all the things that you're doing pretty much in isolation and without much reward, hopefully over the next few years are going to become much more highly valued.
All right, so at that, we have a few minutes left, and I'm going to come down off my podium here. And do we have questions? I hope. All right, Mr. Walker, I'm going to come your direction. Let's not run into each other. That's not.
Right. Okay. So, you have to follow my train of thought, which sometimes is derailed here. But it seems to me that what we're talking about is the end product, right? We want the students to be well versed in STEAM, creative thinking, and problem solving. And if something cool is going to happen next March, I can't wait for it to happen because my birthday's in March, and so happy birthday to me, thank you. But we're training teachers still in the antiquated model, right? So if the college is going to say we want these kids that are trained in the arts and creative thinking, but they're still training teachers to be in their closed classroom teaching mathematics, and I don't have it's not a question, it's not a solution, it's just an observation. It seems like the circle is not connecting here. It's almost like it's creating a spiral. I'm just going to put that out there.
One thing we've talked about extensively is really looking at pre-service professional development. So the collaborative has an NEA, this NEA grant we have is focusing on professional development, and we hope to take it after we've tested it with classroom teachers into some college classrooms. That's another grant, but that's definitely, you're exactly right. It's not going to happen until we get to pre-service.
Yeah, again, some of this is going to change because of the congressional committees. Money has now been put into NSF for new kinds of teacher training where they're going to have STEM people working with people in the arts. There are whole sets of grants available. Some of the better universities have already cottoned on to this. Arizona State University, for example, has totally transformed their teacher training. They've hired a whole bunch of people who are doing integrative stuff, both with technology and the arts and with sciences and the arts. There are a couple new engineering colleges which have engineering education programs which have completely integrated arts and design into their engineering curriculum. So all the students get it, including the people who are going to be doing engineering training or technology training in schools and so forth. So it's starting. What looks like happening is that these programs are so successful that everybody else is starting to scramble. So Again, over the next 10 years, I really think there's going to be a huge change. 30 years ago, when I first started doing this and trying to talk about it, I couldn't find audiences to talk to. I couldn't find any money. There was no place to publish. Now I turn down 2/3 of the invitations I get to give talks. I can't keep up with all the stuff that's going on. There has been a sea change in how we look at STEM arts. It's slow. It probably hasn't impacted you yet, but from my perspective, it's a really, really huge change.
May I ask? So the proof is in the pudding. I know so much of what is driven by our administrators is testing results. So will then PSAT and SAT follow that March, report, encouragement?
So if James Catterall were here, I'm going to empathize and become James Catterall. He's already done studies on the SATs. Kids who have arts, and the more arts they have, or the more music they have in high school, basically it gives you a 200-point advantage on your SATs. That's a huge difference. Okay, it's very, very significant. This is true whether you're in a good school system, a bad school system, whether you're a minority, whether you're a woman, whether you're a man. I mean, it's across the board. So some of that is already known. For whatever reasons, the arts have a huge impact on learning. I think some of it's just because of the things we've already talked about here. We're not doing it as well as we could, so a lot of the kids who are doing these impacts are putting it together for themselves, or they have one teacher who helps them. Imagine if we do this across everything. My contention has always been, if this works, we can continue testing the way we've been testing, and scores will go up because we're more effective. I think what we need to do is stop teaching to the tests, because that's a total waste of time. And if you look at the school systems that are doing the best, they don't teach to the test. They teach what is best for their kids and what they know works, and the kids still do better. And I will give you the world's best school system, that's Finland. Finland has stopped teaching subjects, and they don't do any general testing at all. Okay? But on a per capita basis, they have more Nobel Prizes, they have more patents, they have anything you want to measure, they have more than anybody else in the world. And their system has moved entirely to problem-based teaching, and it is local. So the problem-based, if you live in an area where the major thing that you produce is, wood products, all of your education is focused on wood-related industries, and, well, if you think about it, you still have to learn all the economics. If you're going to do economics, you have to know math. If you're going to know math, you have to also know statistics. If you're going to, you also have to know advertising. You have to understand supply chain. You have to understand sociology. A kid who sits down and looks at a problem of how something actually works in their neighborhood has to learn everything. Oh, amazing. And now they're ready to actually work in the workforce. This is the best school system in the world. It's like theater every day. It's totally integrated, okay? And we're slow. We're eventually going to figure this out because competitively, that's who's beating us right now. We have to stop looking at China. We have to stop looking at Korea and Japan. They actually are not innovative in any way whatsoever. I get invited over there all the time because they have the top scores in the world, and they have no inventions, and their workforce is completely unable to innovate, and so forth and so on. And they know it. Why are we mimicking them? I don't get it.
Colleges and universities are also moving away from SAT, ACT as admissions, as exclusive admissions requirements. I think we're moving in all kinds of good directions in that way.
We have time for one more question.
After many years of working at schools with little resources, I just started a new job at a school that has a lot of resources. And as I was being interviewed and interviewing them about what school I was heading into, one of their biggest things was, we have a new innovation center. And they're so proud of it, and they're touting it everywhere. And my ignorance was like, oh, perfect place for me. They need me. I'm the creative person they just hired. And so I toured it, and there was all technology. there was no place to think, there was no place to create, there was no system to create. Oh, look at, we can make these little drones, and look at, we can have this that can make this. And I was standing there going, where is the creativity that has to precede this technology? And as somebody who wants to go back and say, I can bring something to this new innovation center that is sorely needed, is there any courses or credentials or something that would give me credibility to say, this is what you need, that I could take now, that's not going to be later in, you know, is there some summer program, is there some courses, is there something online that I can take to give my ideas to them more credibility?
Just a very practical thought, and that is that there is no question that innovation comes from collaboration. Look at the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode and see that assertiveness and cooperativeness are what are needed to achieve collaboration. And you can make your own argument in a paragraph that you are the kind of person with the kind of skills that are going to help people achieve collaborative relationships.
And you deliver a lot of the thinking skills that they're going to need to be innovative. The skills I've talked about previously, but additionally, if you wanted a course, if you look at the Buffalo State International Center for Creative Studies, that's where creative problem solving started with Osborne and Parnes. They have online courses, or they have blogs. There are things, if you look at what they're doing, that would really give you some information and a leg up.
And the other thing I would do is try to motivate them by pointing out that, okay, I just made a drone. What